Good afternoon. This hearing will come to order. I want to welcome everybody to today's hearing titled Persian Gulf War, an assessment of health outcomes on the 25th anniversary. First, as a preliminary matter, I would like to ask unanimous consent that, let's see, who do we have? I guess they're not here. Don't have to do that.
The answer is yes.
As a fellow Gulf War veteran, I have invited them. Unfortunately, they're not here. Let's see, we don't do that. This hearing will examine VA's treatment of and current health outcomes for veterans suffering from Gulf War illness. The hearing will focus largely on the issues that have arisen since our last hearing on Gulf War illness on March 13th, 2013, and specifically review VA's efforts to improve treatment and outcomes. This hearing marks the 25th anniversary of the Persian Gulf War, a conflict of swift intensity and short duration with what could be the lowest incident of post-traumatic stress disorder of any American war, according to some reports, including VA's own National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. Unfortunately, this anniversary also marks numerous problems, some of which haven't improved since our hearing on Gulf War illness 3 years ago. I'm deeply concerned about how VA continues to characterize Gulf War illness as a mental disorder, as evident in its current clinical guidelines. I am perplexed that these same clinical guidelines are based in part on research that the Institute of Medicine has warned is potentially biased or influenced by pharmaceutical manufacturers. I'm also frustrated by the fact that VA is prescribing psychotropic drugs for not only Gulf War illness, but apparently also for instances of traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And I wonder about a possible connection between drug manufacturers and their sponsored studies and the high rate of prescription drugs being dumped on veterans with Gulf War illness. My concerns regarding VA's overuse of drugs are well-founded, given this committee's hearing last June that revealed VA administrators acknowledging the practice of overprescribing medication and turning veterans into drug addicts. VA has previously testified that Gulf War illness is not a mental malady, and its own training course states that it, quote, cannot be ascribed to any known psychiatric disorder, somatoform disorder, PTSD, or depression, unquote. Even so, VA continues to treat veterans as if Gulf War illness was a psychiatric problem, and that is an affront to those who have real physical ailments due to their service. I find it hard to believe cardiovascular disease, the physical scarring of lungs, central sleep apnea, head trauma, cataracts, and a variety of cancers are the manifestations of psychosomatic or psychiatric issues. If it could be as simple as a veteran thinking such things exist and then they disappear, I would simply think, VA is an organization truly capable of caring for veterans, and all of the department's continued failures would simply be resolved. What is even more frustrating is that the Institute of Medicine is apparently recommending no more Gulf War illness research be conducted, and that makes no sense whatsoever. But then again, VA has published so few recent studies that this seems part and parcel of business as usual. Gulf War veterans, myself among them, are tired of hearing the same rhetoric from the VA. Quite frankly, I have had enough of VA telling me one thing and doing the exact opposite. The fact that very little, if anything, has changed in the 3 years since we last held a hearing on VA's treatment of Gulf War illness is not only completely unacceptable, it is infuriating. I look forward to a spirited discussion on this important issue. With that, I yield to Ranking Member Custer for any opening remarks that she may have.
Thank you, Chairman Kaufman, and thank you for your service in the Gulf War. We're all grateful for that. Sunday marks the 25th anniversary of the end of Operation Desert Storm, and over the course of this quarter century, many veterans who served in that conflict have suffered from symptoms that are not readily identifiable or well understood. In fact, nearly 30% of Gulf War veterans suffer from Gulf War illness. These veterans still struggle to receive accurate diagnoses for their symptoms and access to needed health care. The veterans struggle to get effective treatment for their conditions, and for too many years, veterans suffering from Gulf War illness have been told it's all in your head. I think we can all agree today that Gulf War illness is not psychosomatic. Gulf War illness is a chronic, often painful, and sometimes debilitating disease, and our veterans deserve access to VA care and the most effective treatments for their illnesses and injuries. I'm concerned that recent findings from the Institute of Medicine may have been interpreted by some to mean that veterans should only receive mental health treatment for Gulf War illness. I'm also concerned that recent research findings may be interpreted to deny Gulf War veterans and all veterans suffering from ill-defined conditions access to VA health care and effective treatments. I wish to hear from all of our witnesses today so that we may begin to better understand the conclusions and recommendations of the researchers and experts in this field. It's so very important that we develop clear goals to ensure that our veterans receive access to health care, both for mental health and physical health symptoms, and the most effective treatment for their service-connected injuries and illnesses. We know that veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars are also coming to VA hospitals in need of treatment for their symptoms, sometimes symptoms that are similar to those suffered by Gulf War veterans. That's why it's vital that the research continues so that we will best understand the very best treatments and continue to explore issues relating to causation in order to protect the health of our service members going forward. I believe it's incumbent upon us to learn as much as we can about what our nation is asking from our service members and their families when they volunteer and raise their right hand. We must recognize and be prepared to address the costs of that service and use our best efforts to ensure that our veterans are made whole again after returning home. And here I might just add that the chairman and I spent time together over Thanksgiving in Afghanistan, and one of the concerns is if we don't understand the causation behind the Gulf War syndrome and exposure to toxins or other trauma, psychological injury, PTSD, TBI, how this is all coming together, we're not going to have an understanding of putting our troops currently in harm's way in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I feel very strongly that we need to continue to investigate causation while we move forward with treatment for the veterans that have already been exposed. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Custer. We are now joined by United States Representative Jeff Denham from the state of California, a Gulf War veteran. Is there, I ask unanimous approval for Mr. Denham to be able to participate in this hearing?
Absolutely. Welcome, Mr. Denham.
So ordered. Thank you, Ranking Member Custer. I ask that all members waive their opening remarks as per this committee's custom. With that, I invite the first and only panel to the witness table, and you are currently seated. On that panel for the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have Dr. Carolyn Clancy, Deputy Under Secretary for Health for Organizational Excellence. She is accompanied by Dr. Stephen Hunt, Director of VA's Post-Deployment Integrated Care Initiative, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and Dr. Victor Klasinski, I believe. I got that wrong. Senior Program Manager for VA's Gulf War Veterans Illnesses Research at VA. Also on the panel we have Dr. Deborah Corey Selecta, Professor of Environmental Medicine, Pediatrics and Public Health Sciences, and Acting Chair of the Department of Environmental Medicine at the University of Rochester School of Medicine, who will be testifying in her capacity as Chair on the Committee on Gulf War and Health of the Institute of Medicine. Dr. Roberta F. White, Chair of the Department of Environmental Health at Boston University School of Public Health, who is accompanied by Mr. James H. Benz, Gulf War researcher and former chairman of the Research Advisory Committee on Gulf War Veterans Illnesses, and Mr. Anthony Hardy, Gulf War veteran and director of Veterans for Common Sense, who is accompanied by Mr. David K. Winnett, the second Gulf War veteran. I ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Very well. Sit down. Please be seated and let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative.